Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Speedy Gonzalez of Ruining Parlays, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday, the 26th of February, following a pretty chock-a-block week of fights, or weekend of fights. I read through the whole list on the Boycast for the Patreon boys earlier this week, but just to run you down again, there was a UFC event, Moreno versus Royval in Mexico City, obviously. There was the first Rise-In event of the year, Rise-In Landmark 8 in Saga. There was the Bellator versus PFL Champs, which we will be covering today. In addition, there were 3 kickboxing events on, Rise, Crush, and Knockout. There was also Karate Combat 44 in Mexico City, which was there basically the same weekend as the UFC to have all the fighters turn up, but also had some surprising grappling on there. They had Phil Rowe, who loves losing grappling matches, against Craig Jones, and he hit a gorgeous flying triangle off the side of the karate pit, which is absolutely useless for a striking sport or a sport that involves like standing clinches where the guys just fall over because as soon as their heels hit the bottom part of the incline, their bum goes behind their heels and they fall over. So if you watched Sam Alvey, the de facto greatest karateka in the world as the heavyweight champion, if you watched his fight with Ross Levine, they'd get the clinch and he'd just sort of walk Levine towards the edge, and Levine would fall backwards into closed guard on an incline. Same thing happened with the Yama pit years ago in MMA. But I've seen a lot of people in the BJJ community losing their minds over the pit because running out of bounds is a very common strategy in BJJ. And even if guys aren't choosing to do it when they're on one leg defending a single leg or something like that, it happens all the time anyway. And it's the worst. And it means that you have to, the refs have to come over and go, stop, and then pull you back in that position. Or in ADCC, they basically have a rule where you continue off the mats, and they never buy enough mats to actually cover the space that you'd need. So people end up like climbing onto each other's backs while on top of the chairs that spectators have just fled from as they crash off the mats. Mental. But anyway, lots to talk about is what I'm saying. Oh, and Nakatani knocked out Santiago for the WBC bantamweight title. Very impressive. We'll talk about all that extra stuff on the Boycast this week. But we'll do UFC and Bellator versus PFL, because that's the 2 big orgs, and then these bums who've bought Bellator. We'll kick off with the UFC. I think the big standout from this one was Brian Ortega for me. Yeah, he did it again. It's like the Korean Zombie one where everyone was like, oh my God, he's legit again. And then we all realized how washed the Korean Zombie was. Maybe we get that with Yair Rodriguez, but I was very impressed because these two fought once before, and Brian Ortega got the stuffing knocked out of him until his arm broke in the wrong way, and we didn't count the armbar that he was just falling into. And he was failing on he was attempting bad takedowns. He was trying to cage wrestle, which is something that he doesn't normally do. And he did finally get a takedown, but immediately fell into an armbar. But mainly he was getting beaten up on the feet, because for the longest time he hasn't had takedowns, and his thing is Homer Simpsoning his way forward behind his hands. What I loved in this one was that he came back with straight shots of everything Yair Rodriguez threw. There was no, oh, he hit me and he's got away, I'll get him next time. It was always throwing shots back, even if they missed. He did a lot of work when Yair went southpaw. He'd throw a long flicking left hook behind Yair's lead hand, which normally Yair would lean back from, but then he'd throw a right straight, a left straight, a right straight behind it, and he'd come in combination. And that worked really well too, both to actually get to Yair with punches and also to just run him around, because a lot of what he was doing was having to circle around the cage. And it's been very impressive how he doesn't tire from that most of the time. But we're at elevation, and also Ortega really just wanted to get him to the fence for a lot of this stuff. But Rodriguez got to work right away with his flashy kicks, going open stance, so southpaw versus Ortega's orthodox, and throwing the left leg to the body and the head. He was also throwing some nice inside-out kicks with his right leg, the inside crescent kick, whatever you want to call it, and doing it to the body with with the ball of the foot, the twist kick, as we call it on this podcast, the one that Imavov uses all the time, and Leon Edwards stole to use against Colby Covington, and Cyril Gane uses it a lot too. I think one of the crazy things about this fight was that Brian Ortega managed to injure his ankle during the intros, did a big jump and then landed funny and stumbled, and you could hear the crowd go, oh. He got very uncomfortable very quickly. I wanted to see the live betting odds during that little sequence, because between his introduction and then I think they introduced Yair second, it would have been really interesting to see what happened to the odds during that time. Yair hit a couple of stomping sidekicks onto the knee, and One of the things that I criticized him for years ago when he was having that awful fight with Alex Caceres, where they just spun at each other ineffectively for 25 minutes in Mexico, was he picks up his lead leg to his chest and leaps in like he's going to smash the guy's knee, invert his knee with the side kick. And then he tries to lift his leg and for a fake side kick and throw a left high kick or something like that, or a spin kick. And the guy will never stand there because he's just stomped on their knee as hard as he can. He's done well sort of reining it in a little bit in recent years. And I always compare it to Lando Venata. He gets people standing there by just sort of stepping on their leg, so that it's not he's going to stamp through your knee. It's that he's going to keep putting his weight on it a little bit. And if you're standing there with it sort of straight or relaxed, he's going to push it in, and he might injure you. But it encourages people to put some weight on it. So he lands this first side kick on Brian Ortega's knee, and then he does it again, and he throws a left straight behind it and knocks him down. What I really liked here was that Brian Ortega, this was in my notes here, which were made at the time rather than after I watched the fight and was pleasantly surprised by his wrestling. In my notes, I was like, picks up a panic single and immediately goes to the waist with one of his hands and then pulls himself into the body lock. I thought, damn, that's actually a lot better than what he does most of the time. And he's just been like knocked on his ass. But Yair was doing a great job of posting his head and clamping down on one of the overhooks, getting his frame of his hand in, getting the web of his hand into the other bicep and hammering in knees to the body. And, if you watched Leon Edwards fight at all, you know that guys holding on to clinches when he's got the head post, they get beat up. At that point, you just want to let go of the clinch. But they got back out into the open, and Ortega managed to land again by using that slappy long left hook to set up his entries. And then I think it was a low kick took Ortega off his feet, and Rodriguez went into his guard and started dropping some strikes, and it was pretty good. What I do like about Ortega's guard is that it's quite old school, and I don't want to help the Gracie brothers advertise the Gracie Academy, but they do a lot of that one knee in the way or both knees in the way and hips up and straighten the body out on the floor so that you're holding the opponent's weight, and then you can drop them down onto. If you watch his fight with Tavares, I think it's Thiago Tavares, Ortega just elbows this guy to death from the bottom because the guy sits in his guard, and then Ortega will lift his hips off the floor and push the guy back and frame on him with both hands, and then he'll let the guy fall in on top of his elbow. So there was a little bit of that, but I thought Rodriguez was landing decently. It was when Yair tried like a knee through pass, a knee cut pass, a knee across pass, a knee slice pass, whatever you want to call it. Very common pass, very powerful pass. But if you do it without any upper body grips, if you do it without underhooks, you don't really have anything. So he just dives with his knee through, and Ortega just sort of comes up on his back. It was a really weird choice. It was like when Cyril Gane was dropping on that footlock against Ngannou, and it was sort of because he was off balance, but he did end up going to a footlock and letting Ngannou come up on top of him. And that's what sort of happened here with the knee through pass attempt. Ortega takes the back, and then he gets up and he does a really nice. He was threatening to do the broomstick, which is where you got one hook in and you put it across behind the other opponent's other knee and you sit down. But then he just pulled his leg out from the hook and hit a little outside trip from the back body lock. Really nice. So he gets the mount at the end of the first round after being absolutely battered. Second round, he comes out, throwing straight punches. Every time Rodriguez throws or hits him, he comes back with straight punches, 2s and 3s, really lovely, as in 2 or 3 at a time rather than the right straight and the left hook, 2-3. Threw a couple of his own stumpy kicks, which is something I was talking about on the Boycast. Anytime you're fighting a good kicker, doesn't matter if your kicks are worse, throw them because you know when the opponent's going to kick back. There's a really good example of that in the main event between Moreno and Royval. Moreno kicks Royval's inside leg, knowing that Royval will throw the left body kick back, and he immediately steps in and bundles him over with an easy takedown because the guy's on one leg, and you've dictated when he's going to go. Well, you haven't dictated it, but you've encouraged him heavily. Please kick back. I've just thrown my kick, and my kicks aren't nearly as good as your kicks. But Ortega runs him onto the fence, gets the locked hands double, which is still an incredibly powerful takedown, gets him down, and this was like a flashback to Frankie Edgar versus Yair Rodriguez. Yair Rodriguez loves throwing things up from his guard. He's super active from there. But if you put his head against the fence, which is the really old school way of dealing with the guard before people started wall walking really well, he can't do things like that. You need space behind your head to play guard effectively. If you watch, he starts trying to throw up triangles and stuff, but to throw up a triangle, you need to throw your hips up at the guy. And I think it's Ryan Hall calls it like a face hugger, like in Alien. you throw your pelvis up at him, snatch your legs behind his head and pull him down again. You've got to be able to extend and contract, and you can't do that if your head is up against the fence while you're in closed guard. So Ortega just stands over him and starts dropping punches. He's doing some great framing elbows, old Jeremy Horn technique, but still so effective. And even if you go to like a MMA fitness class, they'll teach you how to do this on a bag. You just put your palm on it, straighten your arm, and then you let your palm slip off and you just drop your elbow on it. And it's a great way to learn how to get your weight into something. There's a lot of techniques that take coordination to get power behind, but if you're just dropping your weight on your elbow, it's really easy. So yeah, round 2, lots of good work by Ortega to beat him up along the fence. Round 3, Ortega comes out again, tries to enter the clinch. I think he picks up the single and goes to the body lock again, but Yair, he has the overhook and the hands aren't locked and he starts circling away. And what I really liked was that Ortega just followed him across the cage, sideways, sidestepped with him and let Rodriguez back himself onto the fence. He gets his outside trip again, he falls straight into 3/4 mount, and then he just beats him up until he can get his elbow high enough from mount to attack the arm triangle. And this has been gone down as an arm triangle finish, and it is, it will always be technically an arm triangle finish, but it looked a lot like a move that I love to use myself. And years ago when Ryan Hall's first set of instructionals came out, and everyone loved them because there was nothing like them on the market at the time, he taught this no-gi Ezekiel, he called it. And one of the ways that people alleviate pressure from the arm triangle is that they turn onto their side. It's not really the same mechanics if you're trying to choke someone with an arm triangle and they turn onto their side, as Yair Rodriguez did here. And then you get the full, you lock your hands in the figure 4 like you're doing a rear naked choke, but you have one forearm across the side of their neck, and you lift your choking elbow up towards you. It's a really powerful technique. YouTube it, Ryan Hall Ezekiel. It's not the Ezekiel in the sense that you think of like Alexia Linux Ezekiel, but the Ezekiel from the back in the gi looks a lot like this one, and this is just the no-gi variation, but really smooth. And he went straight to the figure 4 of the hands because he felt Yair rolling away. It was a great performance by Ortega. I thought he looked great. I thought he took action on things that were getting him in trouble. That's one of the things with Ortega. I have always been like, he never shows me anything new. He's not improving. I mean, against Korean Zombie, he switched to southpaw and threw some kicks, but then he went right back to who he was for the next fight. I think it's promising because the wrestling was good and it led into cage wrestling. It wasn't just diving on crap double legs and ending up sprawled out on the floor. It wasn't just trying to snap guys down from the clinch. But it does leave us in an awkward situation because this guy against Ilia Topuria, this is the thing, everyone's like, oh man, people thought Yair Rodriguez would beat Ilia Topuria. It's like a completely different fighter here. Brian Ortega is a very weird individual problem. Got tons of flaws, but he does a load of things that other people can't. Ilia Topuria, a much less flawed fighter all round, but Yair Rodriguez is himself a weird puzzle to solve. I think, you got to give... Certainly, I would give Yair Rodriguez a much better chance against Ilia Topuria than I would Brian Ortega. But then I'm just going to be a person who doesn't believe in Brian Ortega probably for the rest of my life. If he continues surprising me, I'm going to be really happy about it because he does it in really impressive ways. But, it's why you can never count on the guy Homer Simpsoning his way through. It's why Ricky Hatton was always such a difficult prospect, because he was beating everyone, but he was doing it by just having a heart and grit and, his own power and stuff, but he was taking a lot of blows to do it. It's why Rocky Marciano's story wouldn't have ended very well if he hadn't retired and been decapitated in a plane crash. Didn't end that well in actuality, but, it wouldn't have ended that well if he kept fighting. What's next for Yair, man? Oh, you've shot yourself in the foot here. How do you make Josh Emmett look absolutely impotent and then have horrible trouble with Brian Ortega? Anyway, let's talk about the main event before we move on to PFL versus Bellator, and then I'll come back. I'll circle round to do the rest of the card. Brandon v. Brandon. Brandon squared. Moreno versus Royval. These two fought before. It was a one-round banger. Brandon Royval pulled his shoulder out coming up on a leg entanglement, but had been easily taken down a couple of times. In the pre-fight, I was talking about how I'd like to see Brandon Royval sit back and not do his usual marching in stuff, because it is exciting, the being a longer, taller guy, but stepping in and doing damage with the really short-range damaging weapons. But it does give up easy takedowns all the time, always. He gives his weight to the opponent and puts himself out of position. And if you watch the first fight with Moreno, it's just like Moreno's moments come when Brandon Royval throws a kick and then decides to spin through on an elbow or something and gives up his back. This one I thought he did exactly what I was saying. He was sitting back trying to throw kicks and using the jab to draw stuff out of Moreno. Certainly that worked in the latter half of the fight, much better than it did in the first half of the fight. But Moreno, man, this dude changes like every fight. And I think my favourite incarnations of him were maybe the second Davison Figueiredo fight, where he was throwing beautiful counter combinations with his left hook and stuff, or the Kai Kara France fight where he's coming out of a bit of a crouch, but he's throwing combinations with his hands and ending with step-up body kicks with his left leg. I thought he looked great in both those fights, but he changes from fight to fight quite a lot. He strikes me like kind of like Khalil Roundtree, where he comes in and you go, oh, well, I know what you've been working on for the last 6 months, and you've forgotten the thing that you did the last fight. But I don't know where he learned this leaning shit. It was driving me mad. He'd throw a good overhand, or he'd time a good overhand. It wouldn't be a good overhand because he'd be leaning completely over at the waist. But he'd time a good overhand, he'd land it, and then he couldn't follow up because he was leaning so far forward of his hips. You know, if you stay on top of your feet, maybe you step a little bit deeper and you bring your back foot up as you throw the overhand, then you're on top of your feet and you can throw, it could just be a 1-2 afterwards. But if you've got the guy stinging from a punch, you want to be able to hit him a couple more times and then push your advantage. And he wasn't really, like, he couldn't do that for the early going. And then he sort of manufactured a way to counteract his leaning by running up into the lead leg low kick afterwards, which allowed him to carry himself forward and take advantage of Brandon Royval backing away with his eyes closed basically after those overhand counters. But and big left hooks too. Moreno was swinging this wide overhead left hook like he's Igor Vovchanchin. And yeah, it was ugly, ugly stuff. But the timing was there. You know, he was getting the right timings. It's just that he couldn't follow up on it most of the time. And from pretty early on, but much more in the later rounds, Royval was trying to time him leaning forwards, because every time the overhand came in or the big left hook came in, he'd be left leaning forwards, and Royval would time him with either the lead hand uppercut, the right uppercut, which worked really well, or the stepping knees, which if he couldn't get to the head, he'd just throw it to the body instead. There was a nice little combination in the early going from Royval where he threw an up jab with his lead hand, his right hand, and followed up with the left knee. In that second round, he actually landed a good few knees while Moreno was leaning. And in that second round also, Moreno got the takedown, nicely timed takedown off the kick, gets on top. Royval starts playing K-guard, inverting on the leg. Moreno sprawls his legs back and drops down on his hips, leaves his arms on the mat as he does so, and that allows Royval to wrap one up and start attacking an omoplata, and Moreno sort of no-sells it and gets caught with a legitimate threat of a go-go plata, which is very rare. Go-go plata is front of the shin and ankle in front of the throat. Nick Diaz finished Takanori Gomi with one in Pride. Shinya Aoki finished a couple, one from the top and one from the bottom, but they're very rare. In that third round, that's when Moreno did what I was talking about earlier. He threw a right low kick to the inside of the southpaw Royval's right leg, and then immediately as Royval was coming back, he stepped in with the left hook and grabbed at the leg that he expected to be coming and took him down. I don't think Royval did kick back in the way that he expected, but he committed to it so much that he just ran through him. In the fourth round, Royval starts adding more volume, but Moreno starts ending his combinations with that step-up low kick. There was a really good example in the fourth round of Moreno landing a good overhand and Royval taking it on the chin and immediately throwing back his left straight, and he stunned Moreno, and Moreno shells up, and that's when Royval was able to pursue him to the fence and land a knee, and he did in fact take him down, which was very weird. But yeah, he hurt him with that one, which is what Royval was looking for quite a lot throughout the fight. He was throwing like 3 or 4 jabs just on the end of his reach to then slide back and hopefully catch Moreno. And that was the one time that he did it really well. And then round 5, I got more of the same. Very active fight. Another thing that I saw that I really loved. Moreno got the back body lock, and Royval was doing a really good job separating the hands in this fight. His scramble ups were fantastic. He didn't give up as many easy opportunities to take him down, which is all stuff that he can, I was worried he was going to be the same guy forever because he lost his title fight. And it's like, yeah, but I could keep winning bonuses by being fun. But he actually seems to be committing to trying to fight smarter and give fewer openings for easy takedowns. Because his bottom game is very active and creative, but at a certain point that you're still on the bottom, you're at a disadvantage. And if you meet someone like Pantoja, who is just a blanket on top and such a good guard passer, it's not going to work. But in one of the rounds, Royval gives up the back body lock, and as he's separating the hands and running away, Brandon Moreno throws a low kick and hacks his leg right out. It's gorgeous. It reminded me a lot of Eve Edwards knocking out Josh Thompson with the high kick as he broke away. But the legs is a great thing to go for from that position, because the leg, whenever you're running away, the leg is one leg at least is the last thing to leave range. So then we had PFL versus Bellator champs, and this was significant because it was, well, not cross promotion because one promotion owns the other, but it was significant because in Bellator moving past the Scott Coker phase, this was the most Scott Coker outcome for an event because all the heavy betting favourites won. With the exception of Ryan Bader, I believe. I don't know, was he the betting favourite? Anyway, PFL champs all won against guys who weren't necessarily the current PFL champs because half the fights fell through. Pitbull got a replacement fighter, and then the replacement fighter pulled out as well, so he wasn't on the card. He had a terrible fight between Yo Romero and Thiago Santos, which I've been told was terrible. Didn't watch it because I'm not going to fall for Thiago Santos and Yo Romero at this point in my life and at this point in their careers. But your key points, Johnny Eblen, middleweight champion of Bellator. Very impressive in his Bellator run. Beat the worse Edwards brother, Fabian Edwards, and Gegard Mousasi. And even Anatoly Tokov, who's supposed to be one of Fedor's proteges. He was fighting Impa Kasanganay, who was 2-2 in the UFC, got cut a bit prematurely, was victim to the Joaquin Buckley jumping back kick knockout. Took 5 fights last year to win the PFL tournament and $1 million. Came into this one expected to lose comfortably, and he got robbed. I mean, he did more damage in the first round. He damn near stopped Johnny Eblen in the second round. Johnny Eblen held him down and lay and prayed on him in the third round. And then people were like, well, it should have been 5 rounds. Yeah, but they didn't book for 5 rounds, did they? That was one of the great things, or the most hilarious things about this event. They got all their champs fighting each other for belts, new belts that they made, and they're all 3-round fights, even the main event. But yeah, Impa Kasanganay looked great, I thought. Because last time I watched him, he was in the finals and he was just doing sort of a lay and pray of his own. He was just getting takedowns and holding. But his counterpunches were looking great. He was doing lovely side steps down the side of Eblen and hitting him with right hands. Him and Ilia Topuria actually recently, I've been seeing a lot of left-handed parries for right straights, which Ilia Topuria does when he squares up. He does that sort of when he's doing his Mike Tyson impression and he's going head moving from side to side. He squares up and he puts his head over towards the opponent's right shoulder. If they throw their right straight, which both Volkanovski and Emmett did, he parries it and throws his right straight back. And you don't often see the parry to right straight of the opponent's, parry off the opponent's right straight with your left hand to your own right straight. That's very like traditional martial artsy or very old boxing. But I've seen a couple of good ones lately. And Impa Kasanganay was landing them here against Johnny Eblen. Eblen switched to southpaw, threw his big overhand left and grabbed the leg at the same time and got the takedown, as is his wont to do. But I thought Kasanganay, his cage wrestling and his get-ups looked great. Both of them were using... it's either very sloppy boxing or you remember that Willie Pep did it, so it must be great boxing. But throwing long loopy punches with either their left or right hand and then following up with a jab, having moved themselves in too close. So you throw a big overhand or something like that, or a big maybe not an uppercut. You throw a big overhand, slaps against the opponent's guard, and then you just jab a couple of inches through their head because you're throwing your longer punch second. And Kasanganay was throwing a looping left hook and then a jab down the inside afterwards. Kasanganay drops Eblen in the second round, and then Eblen grabs a single leg, and Kasanganay's on one leg, hopping knees him in the face, Eve Edwards style. If you've never seen that knockout, it's one of the greatest things you'll ever see in MMA. Look up Eve Edwards' flying knee, and you'll probably have to trawl through a few because he did a few. But Eblen finally gets him down and lay in praise for the rest of the round. Third round starts, Kasangane's counter-punching is still looking good, but then he starts to slow down, and then Eblen pushes the pace, secures the takedowns, rides out the win. Everyone goes, well, yeah, Impa Kasangane is better than we expected, but Johnny Eblen is also not secretly the best middleweight in the world. But then he might be, you know. There's nothing to say he couldn't take down Dricus du Plessis or Sean Strickland. That division is a mess. A really good one was Jason Jackson. He got matched against Ray Cooper because Magomed Kerimov, the current welterweight champion, pulled out. Ray Cooper won 2 of these tournaments. I think it was 2019 and 2020. He has $2 million in the bank. He doesn't care. He's missed weight for his last 3 fights, I think it is. But man, he came out swinging, and Jason Jackson said, "Calm down." Calf kicked him a few times, and Ray Cooper just folded. He basically gave up. Easy TKO for Jason Jackson here. And it was a 182 catch weight, so I suspect Ray Cooper wasn't going to make weight again. Very funny. Nemkov easily arm triangle Bruno Capoloza, who was, I think, 2021 heavyweight champion. But if you're not getting it yet, the Bellator fighters are much better, but the PFL fighters are the ones who've been making $1 million being pretty mid. I'll always remember when they released Pitbull's pay. I think it was for the first McKee fight, and he made like $250,000. And you're going, this dude is the staple of your promotion. He's the most Bellator fighter. He's the most exciting fighter you've got. He's the best fighter you've got. He's the most accomplished fighter within Bellator. And you're still paying him like $250. Crazy. And then not a champion versus champion fight, but AJ McKee fought Clay Collard. This one was when Clay Collard got up after being tapped out in a minute. He did a shrug that was like exactly how I felt. I was like, yeah, well, that's what happens when my fun guy meets my actual world-class guy. AJ McKee, really smooth grappling, very cool. Came out with the side kick that I scouted him for years ago. I was like, he's going to throw this straight off the bat because it's his favourite move. Always does a step-up southpaw side kick. And he hit Collard right in the chest with it. And then a quick jab overhand. Time to take down, put Collard to his butt, but then jumped on a guillotine and fell to his own butt. And as he fell on the guillotine, he jumped over one of Collard's arms with his legs. So he had a guard locked around Collard, but one of the arms was in, which meant that when he released the head on the guillotine, he could jump straight to the triangle. And then he eventually did a straight arm lock on the arm as Collard was squirming his head out. Really quick finish, AJ McKee doing AJ McKee things. Anything on the prelims wasn't advertised and wasn't shown, even though Aaron Pico was on there and Clarissa Shields. But, I think it was very funny that Scott Coker was tweeting like, 4-0 to the team so far. Great job, guys, and stuff. It's like, oh yeah, does this confirm that you're just a bad promoter, mate? Because I've always said Bellator has about 10% of the best fighters in the world, whereas ONE and PFL never did. Bellator actually picks up some really world-class talent who definitely could compete with the UFC guys in their own divisions. And it isn't a given that the UFC has the best guys in the world or the best guy in the world, any weight. But they have consistently a deeper division than all of the Bellator ones. And you actually have to prove yourself to get to the top. But most of Bellator's problems were to do with terrible marketing. No one knew when the events were happening. No one knew what they were being shown on. It was like country music TV at one point. Terrible production. Every fight, the commentary actually made the fight unwatchable. That's how bad Big John McCarthy was on commentary. And Chael Sonnen, to his credit, tried his hardest to emulate that on this broadcast. Oh my God, hard work listening to that. But at least he's got a bit of charisma. I really wish... I sometimes tweet it under his, reply to his tweets and ask him, but I genuinely really wish I could get a legitimate answer out of Scott Coker. Why, when you saw that everyone hated Big John McCarthy's commentary, and everyone, with the exception of 2 or 3 people who love his podcast, everyone said, this makes the fights worse. This makes the fights worse. This is awful. Why did you continue having him front and center, not just for the commentary, but the interviews? Such a weird decision. I want to write what's that book called? The 50 Rules of Power or whatever it is. And it's all about what Yellow Kid Wild did or someone like that. I want to do that, but with Scott Coker's promotion precepts. And it'll be like, you've hired Mike Goldberg and Big John McCarthy. One is a commentator with 15 years under his belt, and one is a referee with no experience commentating. They're both terrible. Which do you fire? And it's a real like dinner with Jay-Z or $500,000 question. He fired the one with 15 years of proven being bad, and he kept the one who could still improve. But he is still bad. I genuinely would prefer Mike Goldberg to Big John McCarthy. Ryan Bader fought Renan Ferreira. Jesus Christ, the size of Renan Ferreira. I definitely underestimated this, because once you saw them next to each other, you were like, oh, I don't feel so comfortable picking Ryan Bader, because Renan Ferreira in his last match, he basically got held down from the first minute of the first round to the end of the first round. And you're going, well, if some guy holds you down, Ryan Bader should be able to just murk you. But, of course, Ryan Bader has an off switch on the front of his head that you only need to tickle with a feather. And Renan Ferreira is gigantic. So Ryan Bader's there awkwardly bouncing around and you're going, is he going to do the thing he did against Rumble when he was scared of getting hit? He just dived for a leg and fell on his knees. But he didn't. He jabbed in, and then Renan Ferreira went, right, I'm countering now, 1-2, hit him on the chin, Ryan Bader went down. There were some people complaining in the comments on Twitter about an early stoppage, but, you know, it's Bader. He'd just go stiff after a couple of punches. I mean, the real big loser here is Linton Vassell, because he could have been fighting Ryan Bader, And he could have been smashing Ryan Bader, or he could have been fighting Renan Ferreira and actually taking him down. But they said that the winner of this gets Francis Ngannou. They had Francis Ngannou at the event. This was in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And he'd left before they could do a stare down. He's so clearly not going to do it. I mean, why would you? If the boxing paydays are there, and boxing, it's not just like someone was saying about Claressa Shields, she's the only one brave enough to do these cross promotion, these cross sport fights. All the men's boxers are scared. And you're like, no, all the men's boxers make more money boxing than they would guaranteed losing in MMA against much more dangerous opponents. Even if you fought absolute bums in the men's game, much more dangerous to your health and to your profession and long-term health than the women that Claressa Shields is fighting. Canelo is never going to, there's no amount of money. There's a monetary value on anything. I would fight Renan Ferreira for a certain amount of money. If you offered me it, it would be like I'd never have to do anything again sort of money, but the sum exists. Francis Ngannou will make big money whether he goes MMA or boxing. But you've got to remember, he wanted to be a boxer. Someone found him and said, why don't you try MMA instead? It's easier, and boxers tend to start in like their early teens and get good that way. And now he has the choice, and he can do the boxing. So, of course, he's going to do the boxing. The other hilarious one was that they had John Jones there in the... I'm not going to say anything insensitive. I don't know what the headdress is called, but they had him there in that. And he was just pretending he's going to fight Francis Ngannou in PFL, just being an absolute troll. The UFC must hate seeing stuff like that. But the highlight for me was the footage backstage of him meeting Fedor and him going, Fedor, I love you. You're my favorite. I loved watching you. And you're like, oh my God, a genuinely endearing moment from John Jones. He goes, and Alex. I love Alex too. Then he goes, tell Alex hi from me when you see him. And then you go, okay, right. Step back a second there. Fedor's brother Alex, very talented heavyweight, 6'8", fastest hands you've ever seen on a heavyweight. Fedor himself said Alex would be better if he trained. Alex got hepatitis and ruined his own chance at debuting in the US. Alex appeared in fixed fights that made everyone stop caring about his actual fights, or what were his actual fights. And then Alex kidnapped his cleaning lady and used her as a sex slave and stuff. That's the part that really should get you hung up on. He ended up in prison. Fedor, who was having a fairly successful career as a politician and a friend of Vladimir Putin, disowned him. I think he said, I've tried all I can to help Alex. He's a lost cause. And yeah, he now says that he doesn't have a brother. To be say hi to your disowned brother for me. It's just such a John Jones move. I can forgive him for not keeping up with the minutiae of what Fedor's up to in his career, but the Alex story was pretty big. Right, anything good on the undercard or the rest of the card for the UFC? Daniel Zellhuber, I liked him against Francisco Prada. Prada was fun, trying to do his best Mike Tyson. game as hell. This was a little bit like Zellhuber versus Yargos from last time, where he wants to land this nice counter right uppercut he has, because he's taller than his opponents and they often lean in. But if you throw the right uppercut, your right hand is down by your side, and then it's up by their chin, and then it's got to come all the way back to your chin. If they've got a good left hook, you're going to get clubbed. And he did in the early going against Yargos, and then as the fight progressed and he got Yargos' timing and Yargos slowed down a bit, he started landing that right uppercut and eventually hurt him and finished him. This one he had to worry about the overhand more, but again, it was the same. It was like, don't open up too much to counter right now. They had him go southpaw for long periods. He was jabbing lots, and then as the fight progressed, he was jabbing and feinting and getting Prado to slip and hitting him in the slip. The one that opened his eye up was a jab as he threw the jab to where Prado moved his head. And then he was throwing these jabs and grabbing the double collar tie and kneeing. That was working really well. And it was just that until the end. Prado, game as hell, but not slick enough here. Lacerda completed his 0-6 run in the UFC by... normally this guy comes out at 1,000,000 miles an hour, gasses in the first round, and then gets finished. This time, he didn't come out at 1,000,000 miles an hour, ended up on top of his opponent, still gassed out, and got submitted with the slowest, easiest triangle choke you've ever seen. As they were talking about how he's Charles Oliveira's protege on commentary. There is already a Charles Oliveira protege in that division, and his name's Alan Nascimento, and he rocks. But, man, Lacerda... Not only that, but he had this fight booked and he came in overweight. So it's like you're not even just a bum in the ring anymore. Like now you're just being unprofessional. Really, yeah, depressing stuff. And then my favourite fight of the night, I think fight-wise, as in like what I would give my fight of the night bonus, was Raoni Barcelos versus Christian Quinones. Barcelos is on a, 1-4 run at the moment. He's having a bit of trouble. He's in a hard division and he's slowed down. He used to be a bit of a boogeyman in that division. It was like you don't want to be fighting him. But yeah, he has clearly slowed down. Quinones came out. He's longer, taller. He's bouncing in and out. And what I really loved was that Barcelos immediately started timing calf kicks on the bounce in. Because the guy bounces back, he's coming straight back in and his foot's going to be in front of him when he does it. You saw Barcelos reaching out for singles like Brian Ortega. It's free. Reach out for the single. If they pull their leg back, you go into the clinch or you throw some punches or whatever. So he does that a couple of times. He grabs a single and he hits a trap hook dump, which is a really cool technique that you can look up on YouTube. But Quinones did a beautiful get-up, had the underhook from half guard, built up Lucas Leite style and got right back up. And then he gets behind Raoni Barcelos, and Barcelos performs a series of the most flagrant fence grabs you've ever seen. He was like the beginning of Fallout, where people are banging against the fence and holding onto it, and then the nuclear blast goes off, and their body's like flying away into atoms, but their hands are still on the fence. There was a gorgeous Sakui Nagi, or a scoop throw, a sidewalk slam, if you like, in pro wrestling, which is where Quinones was behind him with the back body lock. Barcelos stepped his own leg back around Quinones and then leaned over and threw him over the leg, but ended up back in the same position anyway. Second round, they both hurt each other. There's a takedown, a scramble. Quinones gets back up. As Quinones is getting back up, Barcelos, from the clinch, releases and throws a right hook, a sneaker right on the chin. Beautiful. Grabs a guillotine. Hits an outside trip during the guillotine, which is very cool. And then Quinones shows a feint and Barcelos is slowing right down. So he does a big snip to get out of the way and he stays there and gets hit with a right hand that stuns him. And in the third round, a kick from Quinones gets caught, dragged across the body, trips straight to the back, rear naked choke. But a great fight. And I would like... Raoni Barcelos didn't get enough attention when he was like at his peak, when he was athletic and still moderately young. But I'd love it if he just started cheating his arse off and made one more run at the title. Because he's my boy. And if you saw him, like, his counterpunches are so sharp. He took 4 punches on the guard, which is great confidence to have in your high guard, that you can just stand in front of someone and take 4 punches in a row. And then he immediately lands a short left hook on the chin, straight back. Beautiful stuff. Watch his fight with Timo Valiev. Watch any of those fights except the recent few that he lost. He's brilliant. Anyway, that'll do us for today. I'll be back midweek to talk about everything that's coming up, and also all the stuff I didn't talk about today. The KSW event with different rules for every fight. The kickboxing. The boxing, Nakatani versus Santiago. Sign up to the Patreon. Support the podcast. Get extra stuff. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Not booking any heavyweights on this card at Elevation and having to fill up the next few weeks with crap heavyweight headliners. Bless.